Kawhi Leonard, does he make Toronto a serious title contender right now?
I do believe he's a serious contender in the Eastern Conference for sure. This is the first transaction that's happened in this cycle that has really, I think, changed the face of the NBA, changed the balance of power. Obviously, Giannis is a top 5 player in the league, and the Heat have potential. Their roster, in my view, isn't quite complete yet. Toronto is a team that I think is now very formidable. You add Kawhi Leonard, who had a brilliant season last year.
Seven years ago, Kawhi Leonard walked away from the city that had just watched him deliver the greatest season in franchise history. 1 championship, 1 finals MVP. Then, he was gone. For years, it felt like that story had its ending. Until this summer, Toronto didn't just bring Kawhi Leonard back. They traded one of their best scorers, one of their brightest young players, and multiple future draft picks for a 35-year-old superstar whose career has been as defined by injuries as championships. On the surface, it looked like one of the biggest gambles the franchise had ever taken. But once you understand why they made it, this trade starts to look very different.
Seems like leaving LA is the theme of the day, as the Clippers have agreed on the framework of a deal with Toronto to send Kawhi Leonard back to the Raptors for Brandon Ingram, Gradey Dick, 2 first-round picks, 1 pick swap.
The strange thing about this trade is that Toronto wasn't trying to escape the bottom of the standings. They weren't a team trapped in a rebuild. They weren't a franchise searching for an identity. In fact, they were finally moving in the right direction. After a disappointing season the year before, the Raptors responded with one of the biggest turnarounds in the Eastern Conference. They won 46 games, finished 5th in the East, and pushed Cleveland to a winner-take-all Game 7 in the opening round of the playoffs. For the first time in years, there was genuine optimism in Toronto. Scottie Barnes had established himself as the face of the franchise. Emmanuel quickly had settled into the starting point guard role. RJ Barrett was playing some of the most efficient basketball of his career. Darko Rajakovic had built a young team that competed every single night. They had talent. They had chemistry. They had a future. Which is exactly why what happened next caught so many people off guard. Because teams in Toronto's position don't usually push all of their chips to the center of the table. They wait. They develop. They trust the process. Toronto chose something completely different. They picked up the phone and called the Los Angeles Clippers. And by the time those conversations were over, one of the biggest trades in franchise history had been completed. Real quick, if you're still watching, you're exactly the type of basketball fan this channel was built for. So hit that subscribe button, because every week we break down the stories the rest of the NBA world usually misses. Every blockbuster trade has a price. The question is, did Toronto pay too much? At first glance, the answer felt obvious. Brandon Ingram was gone. A former All-Star, one of the league's most gifted scorers, and the player Toronto had only recently brought in hoping he could become the perfect running mate for Scottie Barnes. Before fans even had the chance to imagine what that partnership could become, it was over. Then came Gradey Dick, a first-round pick the Raptors had invested years into developing, one of the organization's brightest young shooters. A player many believed would be part of Toronto's next great core, and that's what made people so uncomfortable. Kawhi Leonard wasn't 28 anymore. He wasn't even 32. He was 35 years old, a player whose resume was undeniable, but whose availability had become the biggest question of his career. To many people, the math simply didn't add up. So why would Toronto make this move anyway? Because inside the organization, they believed they weren't trading for the Kawhi everyone remembered. They believed they were trading for the Kawhi everyone had stopped paying attention to. On the surface, the criticism made perfect sense. Kawhi Leonard was no longer the player who carried Toronto to its first NBA championship in 2019. He was older. He had missed significant time with injuries, and every season seemed to come with the same question. Could he stay healthy long enough to make another championship run? Most teams looked at those questions and saw reasons to stay away. Toronto looked at the exact same questions and saw an opportunity. Because when Kawhi was actually on the floor, something remarkable was still happening. The explosiveness wasn't quite the same, but the footwork was, the strength was, the patience was. Defenders still struggled to move him off his spots. His mid-range game remained one of the most reliable weapons in basketball. And perhaps most importantly, the game had slowed down for him. He no longer relied on overwhelming athleticism. He relied on timing, experience, precision. Toronto wasn't expecting Kawhi Leonard to play like he was 27 again. They didn't need him to. They believed that if they could manage his workload, keep him healthy, and surround him with the right pieces, he could still become the player who mattered most when the games mattered most. Because championships aren't usually won by the most athletic teams. They're won by the teams that have players capable of taking over the biggest moments. And very few players in NBA history have built a reputation for doing exactly that, quite like Kawhi Leonard. Suddenly, this trade wasn't just about bringing back a franchise legend. It was about betting that one player could change the ceiling of an entire organization one more time. The easiest thing to say about this trade was that Toronto should have been patient. Keep developing the young core. Hold on to the draft picks. Wait another year. On paper, that sounds like the safe decision. But championships are rarely won by teams that wait for the perfect moment. They're won by teams that recognize when an opportunity is sitting right in front of them and have the courage to act. Toronto believed that opportunity was now. Scotty Barnes was entering the prime years of his career. The roster had matured. The Eastern Conference had become more open than it had been in years. Around the league, contenders were getting older. Others were dealing with injuries. Some were still trying to figure out new rosters. Toronto saw a window. Maybe not a wide open one, but one they believed was worth attacking. And that's where Kawhi Leonard changed the equation. He wasn't brought back to carry the franchise by himself. He was brought back to raise the standard for everyone around him. His experience, his championship resume, his ability to stay calm in the biggest moments. Those were things this young Raptors team couldn't learn from a draft pick. They had to live it. Toronto knew the risks. They knew the questions surrounding Kawhi's health weren't going away. But they also understood something every championship organization eventually learns. Playing it safe rarely changes history. Sometimes, the biggest risk is refusing to take one. Maybe that's why this trade has divided so many people. Not because anyone doubts who Kawhi Leonard has been, but because nobody can say for certain who he'll be next. Toronto understands that. They know injuries don't disappear because a player changes jerseys. They know age catches every superstar eventually, and they know they gave up pieces that could have been part of the franchise for years to come. But they also know something else. Opportunities like this don't come around very often. Most teams spend years searching for a player capable of changing the direction of an organization. Toronto already knew what that looked like. They had lived it before. In 2019, Kawhi Leonard delivered the greatest season in Raptors history. 7 years later, the franchise has decided that one championship wasn't enough to close the book. They're willing to open that chapter one more time. Whether that decision becomes another unforgettable triumph or one of the boldest mistakes in franchise history, only time will answer. But one thing is already certain. Toronto didn't make this trade hoping to be good. They made it chasing something far more difficult. Basketball has always rewarded the teams willing to make impossible decisions. Sometimes those decisions become legendary. Sometimes they become cautionary tales. Right now, nobody knows which one this trade will become. Years from now, people won't remember how many draft picks Toronto gave away. They won't remember the debates on television or the arguments across social media. They'll remember one thing. Did bringing Kawhi Leonard back deliver another championship? Because that's the standard Toronto chose the moment they made this move. And until that question is answered, this will remain one of the most fascinating gambles in modern NBA history. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to Scary Zone. We don't just react to the biggest NBA stories, we dig into the decisions, the risks, and the moments that shape the league. If you love basketball beyond the headlines, you're in the right place. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.